Test.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you are having a wonderful time. This is a friendly reminder that our next session will begin shortly. Please make your way back to the ballroom and take your seats. We have an exciting lineup of speakers and activities that you don't want to miss. Thank you, and we will be starting soon. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to begin our next session, Lightning Talks. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this segment, Yash Agarwal, Stakeholder Engagement Manager South Asia ICANN. Please join me in welcoming Yash Agarwal to the stage.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. Just want to make sure that perfect. While we still have people trickling in, right? Thank you so much for joining and attending the session here today. As you just mentioned, I've joined ICANN recently. I work as a GSE manager for South Asia, right? And today, it's a slightly different format, right, from what we have had all day, right? Because there's no panel, there's no chairs, right? It's the lightning talk session. As the name suggests, we'll have 4 different speakers, actually 5. 2 of them are speaking together, right, on 4 different subjects, right? And we'll try and cover it fairly quickly on a vast range of subjects that we're trying to cover today, right? Without any further ado, right, can I please invite, and for the topic that is domain abuse in India, past, present, and future, can I please invite Vivek Goyal on stage, please? Can we have a round of applause, please? Can we have Vivek's slides, please? And just as ground rules for audience members, since it's very time constrained, right, I would request you to have very specific questions, right, at the end of it so that we can take it up. And for our speakers, can I trouble you to also stick to the time block? Thank you.
Thank you, Yash. For those who cannot find seats, please request them. They'll give you chairs. Okay, last session of the day. That's fine. So, I have slides prepared, given the huge interest in this topic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to speak more about what I believe is going on and not refer to the slides that much. It will be a guide for me. If you feel that what I've said and you have a question or a comment on it, please stop me there and ask me, okay? Let's not do it as a slide format. More of a discussion since it's an intimate setting. Okay, thank you. So, can I just request slide change instead of trying to do the clicker? Slide change, please. Okay. So, domain abuse in India, past, present, and future. Next slide, please. I love domain names. That's an imaginary quote from an imaginary general counsel of a company. I've been doing brand protection for about 5 years, 6 years now. I have never heard a brand manager, a business manager, a legal person ever said to me, I love domain names. They think domain names is a necessary evil. They do not like that people create domain names using their trademarks. They just don't want to work with domain names, either because they don't understand it or because they think there is no proper regulation to help them combat the abuse that they are facing. Next slide, please. In a typical month, we as a company shut down about 800 plus domain names, and these are the domain names that we shut down. These are not the ones that we process. We process close to 1,000, 1,200 domain names in a month, and our success rate varies from 80% in a bad month to about 95% in a good month. And we work with multiple sectors. So it's not that our results are reflecting only on one sector. We work with FMCG companies, pharma companies, e-commerce brands, fintech companies, home appliances companies, travel platforms, job platforms. So these stats speaks across sector. With 80% success, we think we are in a good place, but we see these numbers rising drastically. Next slide, please. India has about 800 million people who access the internet. That's more than the population of a lot of countries around the world, right? And there is a growth in India because of network effects. More and more people are getting online because more and more services are being offered online. India has one of the lowest mobile data rates in the world, and there's a flood of phones, affordable phones, which can offer you 4G and 5G in India now. There is a huge push from the government to make government services available online. There's a plethora of online content platforms. I have sat in Ubers where a person is watching a movie while he's driving. So at every time he stops at a red light, he continues his show. The moment it turns green, he pauses it, drives, wait for the next stop, right? So this is the growth. This is driving the growth of internet users in India. And along with this is driving the growth of threat actors who are spamming and abusing and making use of these guys to make money. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about trends in India in domain abuse, past, present, and future. Let's look at what's happening in the past that we have seen between 2020 and 2022. Next slide, please. Earlier, most of the domain abuse, about 99% of them, had 3 TLDs. .in, which is the CCTLD of India, .co.in, and a .com. This is by far represented the most amount of domain abuse. Why? Because these were the TLDs that were known to the public that were become victims. If at that point of time, the threat actors were using .site or .online, people would assume that these domains are fake and would not click on them or trust them. That is why the threat actors were specifically using the TLDs that were known and trusted by the public in general. Second level domains, so vivek.in, that's all that was being used. There was no third level use. Again, because the familiarity with domains, there weren't that many services then being offered via websites. So the threat actors were using what was being used, what was being trusted. So most of the abuse that we saw was from second level domains at max. There was no third level domain till 2022. The length of the domain, that's important, right? The length of the domain was at max twice the size of the brand name. Let's say Samsung is a brand name. So the whole domain name, excluding the TLD, would be at max twice the length of the number of characters in the keyword Samsung. So that the person who's using or who's looking at that domain name at that link would focus on Samsung and not think that there is something wrong with it. Secondly, ChatGPT was just coming online. There weren't many ways for these threat actors to come up with innovative ways to come up with domain names that would still be trusted and accepted by the public. So we weren't finding a lot of long domain names. The length of the domain names was quite short. Domain names are very interesting. I love domain names because maybe I'm not a general counsel of any company. There are 2 ways to take down a domain name that is abusive. One, you work with the registrar or the registry to suspend the domain. Once a domain is suspended, it cannot be used again till it expires. The second option is you work with other companies that have enabled that website to be up, for example, a hosting company, to suspend the hosting of that domain. But that means the threat actor can go to another company and get the website up and running. So we, on average, the same domain we had to enforce about 1.2 times. So if there were 10 domains, we had to take about 12 enforcement actions. That means the threat actors weren't making a lot of money per domain because they would only use the domain once, and if it was suspended or the website taken down, they would not bring it up again. And there weren't a many number of registrars and hosting providers that were being used by these threat actors. Most of these registrars and hosting providers were consolidated to maximum 5 or 6 because again, they were within the region, they were cheaper, and you did not have to pay in US dollars to access their services. Next slide, please. Where we are now, new TLDs are now acceptable in India. There are many popular companies which are using one of the new GTLDs to give their services and use it as a domain name for their website. And that is why threat actors have also started using new TLDs because they have become acceptable, because they are visible, and it would not raise a red flag with them. Domain names are becoming larger because your size of your phone is becoming larger. Everybody wants a larger phone, so they can see a domain name completely without it wrapping around. Third level domains are gaining popularity. People do not realize that the third level domain is not the domain. So they would have domain names which would appear okay, but at the third level, they were malicious. And that we are seeing a lot coming up in India now. Our number of enforcement per domain has gone up to 1.8. The threat actors are becoming economical. They want to use the domain more so they can get more for their buck. So if we have 10 domains now, we have to do 18 shutdowns for those domains to stay down. A lot of hosting providers and registrars are now available, so we have to act with different providers to keep the domains and websites down. The unique thing we are seeing now is that the domain names themselves are not pointing to anything. You go to a domain name, samsungcoupons.com, nothing. But what these guys are doing, samsungcoupons.com/coupons for 2024/car offers, that would resolve to a website. So it is very difficult now to identify these domain names by just using the zone files. You really have to have the power to scrap the web in order to identify these malicious domains and websites and take them down. Next slide, please. What do we see as the future? As new GTLDs will become more and more popular, in 2026 when the next round will be launched, new GTLDs will open the door for more domain abuse and phishing attacks. Not having a brand TLD, and I want to emphasize on that, not having a brand TLD will be a negative for brands. As the next round opens, more and more brands will get a brand TLD, and because the space will become so cluttered, having a brand TLD will help establish confidence in your brand and tell customers that there is no abuse on this TLD. Multi-level domains will become popular. Right now we are seeing third level. I am sure we'll see fourth level, fifth level domains, subdomains being used in order to conduct phishing attacks. You know, tools are for everybody. For us as people who challenge threat actors, for threat actors who use it to come up with better domain names, faster in order to abuse and harm the customers. The last, blockchain domain names. I think today there was a session just before this on blockchain domain names and how they are gaining ground. More and more browsers are now enabling blockchain domain names to be resolved. So we will see what happens in the next round, but blockchain domain names will start to be used for abuse and phishing attacks in order to harm the customers. What is it that we can do? Today in this session we don't have it, but everywhere else we have a lot of registries and some registrars present. Just because you think there is no abuse on your system, that does not mean there isn't. Please put clear policies and guidelines so that companies like mine who are fighting brand abuse know exactly what information to give you so that you will take action. Please make it available easily on your platform so we can find this information, because We as much want to provide you the right information for you to take action as you want right information coming to you to take action. It does not help us if we have to send you 5 emails and then you tell us, no, this is wrong, please send it correctly. We want this process to be as efficient as you want it to be.
Vivek, I'll have to ask you to wrap it up.
Sure.
Please.
So with this, thank you so much for your attention. It was great talking to you, and look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivek. That was a great session. Up next, we have someone joining us on Zoom, Swapnil. He was supposed to be in person, but owing to a last-minute medical emergency, could not make it. He's going to speak on who's living off your domain name. We have Swapnil. Swapnil will have you, share your thoughts first, and then we'll have any Q&A that the audience might have. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thanks, Yash. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right. Just checking, Yash, if
It's visible.
I am audible
We can see
and
your
visible.
screen, we can see you, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. So, good evening to everyone. Unfortunately, I would have loved to see you in person, but due to a medical emergency in the family, I had to sort of come back home. But all right, so talking about the catchy presentation title that I have, who is living off your domain name, which hopefully has made you think pertaining to what I'm going to talk about. A little background. So I run this company called as Shrestha. We are based in India. We are a DNS security and cyber threat intelligence company. So we do pretty much anything to do with domain names, not only domain names, but even DNS per se as well. I'm also the co-chair of the DNS Abuse SIG at FIRST. FIRST is a forum of incident response and security teams. And I'm also a community trainer, been teaching DNS in the Asia Pacific region for quite some time. So sometime back in, since November 22, we have been researching into something called as domain shadowing attacks, which I'll explain in a bit. But this is something that we started looking at from a research perspective, like looking at these subdomains, looking at these domain names where these are domain names not actually registered by the threat actor, but they are legitimate domain names. But they are being abused by the threat actor by sort of creating subdomains under them. And this actually started with a particular CCTLD, which is the .lk CCTLD. And one of the things which was very interesting was, despite the fact that the registration process for .lk is sort of regulated in the sense that you need to, if you want to register a domain name under .lk at that point of time, you had to submit a lot of documentation pertaining to KYC or identity documentation, the purpose of why do you need a domain name, and so on. So despite this fact, one of the interesting bits we could see was this regulation not necessarily brings security, even though that may not be the intention of the registry per se, but I'm just saying it from our perspective that regulating registration of a domain name does not necessarily imply that there is not going to be abuse or any malicious activity under that specific zone, right? And this is something which is very interesting because one of the things which happens in the case of a domain shadowing attack is the fact that threat actors are getting access to the control panel of a legitimate domain name, the DNS control panel. And what they're doing is, once they get access to the DNS control panel, they keep the main domain, untouched. So the main domain, the main website is having no problems whatsoever. That's not modified. They create these subdomains, which basically point to the threat actor's infrastructure. So this is, in a nutshell, what a domain shadowing attack is. So the main domain of a registrant, which is legitimate, is not tampered with, but they create these subdomain records under that main domain, under the parent zone, and that is where they host phishing websites or even command and control and malware and whatnot. So here is a technical understanding for, to give you a simpler picture. So you have example.com. So I'm following all RFC protocols pertaining to examples as well. So example.com, and which is legitimate, login.example.com, cpanel.example.com are all pointing to 192.0.2.1, which is AS64496. The threat actor does a brute force, logs in into the DNS control panel of the registrant, adds fish.example.com, bang.example.com, c2.example.com, and points it to the threat actor's IP address and autonomous system, right? So in a nutshell, this is what it is. So let's look at it from a threat actor perspective, right? I mean, because there are many things at play. So from a threat actor perspective, this is amazing because the threat actor doesn't have to gain access to stolen credit cards or somebody else's credit card per se, or stolen funds to register a domain name. Second, there is a reputation that has already been built for the legitimate domain name. So the reputation basically is now going to be a lot useful when you take into consideration that threat intelligence providers are also looking at when they're looking at a domain name, right? So say, for example, I have a domain name brainattic.in. I have had this domain name for more than, I think, 10 plus years, or maybe 15 plus years. So the reputation of my domain name, since I'm not doing anything malicious, since I'm not sending spam, since I'm not hosting anything malicious, threat intelligence providers or vendors would look at it as that reputation is good. So it also becomes, from a technical perspective, a lot, not necessarily for all cases, but from a detection perspective, this becomes a lot useful in terms of a threat actor, because now they can evade detection because the reputation is something that has been built. And as I said, from an economic standpoint, the threat actor doesn't have to spend money, even if it is not their money, to basically buy domain names, registered domain names. Even though domain names are cheap, it eliminates that one element from their business model, right? From a detection perspective, one of the things which we started looking at, like how do we detect this at scale? So one of the very interesting things we started, documenting is, what about detecting it from a deviation perspective? Like, let's say there is this domain name, it is pointing to autonomous system number 1. If the threat actor is pointing it to autonomous system number 2, now that's a deviation, right? So that's one way to sort of detect this. So that's what I'll also share one of the projects that we have built for registrants who can sort of detect this activity. So subdomains would be pointing to a different autonomous system, or subdomains are pointing to a different country, right? Because end of the day, if the threat actor is not compromised that particular web hosting, but is only compromising the domain name or the domain name control panel, then the subdomains would have to point to a different entity, right? So why is this happening? One of the reasons why, based on what we have analyzed, is the fact that this is primarily to do with registrars having, poor security hygiene per se, or the registrant, having a poor password security hygiene, wherein there is from a registrant perspective, it's usually the weak password for the control panel. But from the registrar perspective, it is primarily enabling or allowing the threat actor to do something like a brute force, right? Not having rate limitation, not having a simple thing like a CAPTCHA to prevent and putting barriers in place, right? So the problem lies at both places, not just from the registrar perspective, but even from the perspective of the registrant as well. Then the biggest problem, which I think, I've been doing DNS for more than 15 plus years now. And one of the biggest problems which I think which exists, or a blind spot which exists from a registrant perspective, is the fact that, if I register a domain name and if I add a DNS record, there is absolutely no notification that is going out to me as the registrant. Now, if I'm adding this myself, that's okay. But let's say, for example, somebody else is adding this under my parent zone, then I need to know that there is some sort of a change that is happening to my domain name, right? And everything starts with DNS, right? So it's domain name. That's where we need some sort of alerting mechanism, some sort of mechanism which can basically notify the registrant saying that, hey, there is this DNS A record that has been added, or this DNS record which was already in there has been modified and is now pointing to a different IP address. So this is the other blind spot which exists from for providing value to a registrant as well. So best practice in a nutshell is basically strong, unique passwords for your DNS control panel, right? Because if you have not changed that and you're using the default password which has been provided by the registrar, then there is a huge risk where if the registrar's systems are not secure, are not rate limiting, are not doing n number of things required to prevent a brute force or a compromise, that would result in your access of your domain name to a threat actor as well. The other element which is also missing for a number of registrars is access of two-factor authentication, which is pretty much the norm, but a lot of registrars do not have that. And the third one, which I talked about in the previous slide, was pertaining to monitoring the DNS zone from a registrant perspective. Like if there is any sort of change that is happening, getting that notification. So that does not exist, unfortunately. So I've talked enough of problems pertaining to domain shadowing attacks and what sort of issues that we have seen. Talking about the solution, so we decided to do something about this, right? So we decided to build this project, which we call it as Shadow Finder. This is primarily built for registrants. And what it does is it basically is a web application wherein you can create an account. It's a free project. So you can create an account on shadowfinder.shresthaIT.com, and you can basically add a domain name, your domain name. And what it will do is it will do a couple of things. I talked about how do we detect this and what is going to be from a detection perspective. So from a detection perspective, what we are doing is we also run our own passive DNS project. We do passive DNS analysis in terms of the threat intelligence that we do in the company. So our passive DNS data also enables us to look at any subdomains that has been seen, right? Historically, of course. So this is one element under the hood of Shadow Finder. The second thing, what it also does is subdomain enumeration. So the passive DNS is a passive way of looking at subdomains under a domain name. The second one, which is the more active method, which is basically the subdomain enumeration. So it enumerates subdomains and looks at any sort of domain names subdomains which actually exist under your domain name, and in the dashboard it will list out that. So what are limitations? Right? So to be very specific about this, there are going to be limitations.
Swapnil, I'll request you to quickly wrap up. Thank you.
Yes. So there are going to be limitations pertaining to this tool. One is passive DNS limitation by the passive DNS visibility. Second is the subdomain enumeration techniques will also have an limitation pertaining to identifying certain subdomains which may have particular patterns in it or particular characters in it, right? So it's an early release. We are still polishing the rough edges. So please, if you find any sort of bugs, any issues, feel free and shoot me an email, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to make sure that bug is fixed. In the next release, we are also planning to enrich it with threat intelligence data. So say, for example, there is a subdomain which we have seen in our threat intelligence data, then we'll also point out that and alert the registrant as well. Maybe reverse DNS data, access to reverse DNS data, and then trying to see if there is any sort of correlation to that. And most importantly, alert notifications by email, right? So I think this is something that will be in the next roadmap, what we have for the project. Here are my details pertaining to, in case if you'd like to reach out. I'm on email, LinkedIn, Mastodon as well. And yeah, that's it. So thanks for having me. Any questions? We'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you so much, Swapnil. Up next, we have two speakers from Malaysia who will speak on demystifying abuse, content versus technical in the internet domain system. Can I please request Mohammed Afek Amartulos and he will be speaking later. All right. Could you just join us? Yeah. Yi Ling Yo to join us. They're from MyNIC and MCMC, Malaysian Communication and Multimedia Commission. Thank you so much.
Hi, selamat petang and hi everyone. Thanks for joining our discussion today, whether you are here with us in person or following it live online. Before I proceed, I would like to thank ICANN and all the sponsoring organizations for this wonderful APAC DNS Forum 2024 in this beautiful city of Bali. Can we have the slide, please? So before I move further, I would like to once again introduce my name. I am Afiq, one of the GAC alternate representative for Malaysia, and I am currently working with the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission's MCMC, the regulator for communications and multimedia industry in Malaysia. Well, next slide. So reflecting on the topics that will be presented in this lightning talk session, me and my colleague Yi Ling of MyNIC Berhad will be speaking after me. We'll briefly touch on how we mitigate DNS abuse within .my CCTLD ecosystem. Of course, by saying DNS abuse, I am referring to the 5 broad categories of DNS abuse adopted within ICANN, which we are all familiar with: malware, botnet, phishing, pharming, and spam. However, we will not stop there, and we will also touch a little bit on how we facilitate in terms of mitigating the content abuse as well. So before that, for better understanding, I would like to explain a little bit about the framework of .my CCTLD management in Malaysia. So firstly, the management of .my was vested under Section 179 of the Communications and Multimedia Act 1998, which is the main act vesting and governing MCMC's functions as the regulator for the communications and multimedia industry in Malaysia. And this CMA 1998 also provided other related provisions, such as Section 180, which obligated MCMC to develop a numbering and electronic addressing plan, and EAP, housing all policies and regulations related to electronic addresses, which includes domain names, IP addresses, and also AS numbers. So this CMA also provides MCMC with the authority to appoint a person to manage and maintain .my, in which in this case, MyNIC Berhad was appointed. And this explains why MyNIC is also an important figure in the framework of .my CCTLD operations in Malaysia. So coming to mitigating the DNS abuse within .my, but first I would like to recap the measures we have at the global level that may be useful in helping us mitigate DNS abuse. So first on the list is the DNS security extension, DNSSEC, which enables communication authentication between hosts and DNS data while ensuring data integrity. So as I am not a technical person, however, I couldn't understand why we are still struggling in terms of getting more people to adopt DNSSEC when it is said to be useful and beneficial for reducing DNS abuse. So this is something that we have to ponder on after this. Secondly, we have the ICANN's Domain Abuse Activity Reporting, DAAR project, which analyzes domain registrations alongside reported security threats, which I believe that this analysis helps ICANN to develop policies to combat abuses. But this data may also be useful for CCTLDs in reflecting the current trends when it comes to DNS abuse, though this DAR is mostly participated by the GTLDs. And of course, we have the Registration Data Request, RDRS, which has been widely promoted by ICANN as one of the new initiatives to facilitate data requests. In this matter, we had a discussion yesterday among the GAC APAC members of how important for us to work together in making the RDRS effort a success. I would like to also quote Jarong's yesterday said that this service will only be able to evolve and be better if we use it and we share our experience in using it. So I think we have to help ICANN in terms of promoting RDRS usage within our national level. And then for my perspectives, well, I will try to differentiate the mitigative measures into two main areas. Basically, first would be a clear obligations under the NAP for MINIC to manage and ensure stability, security, safety, confidentiality, availability, and integrity of .my, which is this includes DNS abuse. So for the NAP requires the registration data to be collected, verified, preserved, and made available when necessary. This is somewhat a similar approach to the amendments made recently into the registrars and registries agreement, which put a clear obligation for them to mitigate DNS abuse immediate possible. Secondly, the initiation of controlled names, which is comprised of reserved, sensitive, regulated, and reserved second-level domains under .my CCTLD management framework, which is meant to help mitigate names that can be compromised indirectly, causing these names to be registered only by those who has the authority to do so. Okay, moving to the questions of how registries and registrars can actually facilitate in mitigating content abuse. If from global perspective, we have something called acceptable use policies or terms of use, we also have that within .my. On top of that, under the NAP itself, there is a provision where suspension and cancellation of a domain name may be initiated for any content or for any domain names that contravene any written of laws of Malaysia. Just to name a few cases that have been taken action against the domain name under this provision includes illegal selling of certain drugs or medicines and illegal health practicing activity. So another initiatives that are currently also being discussed widely is the appointment of a trusted notifier to monitor and notify abuses. For me, this is a new initiative that could be thought about and discussed, whether it can actually help us in addressing the content abused. And lastly, I think it is worth to mention that under the NAP, we also have 3 dispute resolutions policies to cater trademark, sensitive, and regulated names. So these dispute resolution policies somehow can be leveraged to also mitigate content abuse by ensuring that the registrant registering the domain name was genuinely applied the domain name for a valid and legal means. So moving forward, I would like to highlight 3 points. First, for the registries and registrars to ensure accuracy and availability of the registration data. So this could be done through a proper KYC process in place. And then second, for us to help in fostering the DNSSEC adoption and deployment within our country or within those in our purview. And third is for us to leverage more and more awareness and education programs on DNS abuse. For this, I believe all parties will have to collaborate and support each other. So I think that is all for now. I will pass the mic to Yeling from MINIC Berhad.
Thank you, Afiq. Selamat petang, good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, basically my name, just to introduce myself, I'm Miss Yo. I'm the head of the legal operations at MINIC Berhad. So if I could just call up the slides for MINIC Berhad. So thank you very much to ICANN and Pandi for inviting us to present about MINIC Berhad in the context of content versus technical abuse in the domain name ecosystem. So just to introduce a little bit about MINIC Berhad, we are a government agency. We are a company limited by guarantee. We were established under the Companies Act in Malaysia. Currently, we were acting as both the registry and registrar for the .my CCTLD. We are now moving towards the role to become a technical registry operator. So we consider ourselves a part of Malaysia's critical national information infrastructure in the communications sector. And we see .my domain name as one of the key enablers for the expansion of Malaysia's digital economy ecosystem. We are an agency under the Ministry of Digital. This ministry was just newly set up last year, and we focus basically as a technical registry operator to develop and promote the use of .my within Malaysia and globally as well. So the next slide. Basically, these are the categories in which we are managing and maintaining under the supervision of our ministry and under the regulatory purview of the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission. We have 11 categories, including the internationalized domain name categories. We have open categories under com.my, net.my, org.my, name.my, and this is quite a relatively new open category that we made available for the past 2 years, biz.my for the micro, small, medium enterprises in Malaysia. We have opened the .my second level for the global community in just a little over a month ago in June. And for the restricted categories, we do provide the third level registrations for government organizations in Malaysia, for edu.my, educational schools and universities, MIL for the military, and this is also a relatively new restricted category that we opened, coop.my, that's for cooperatives in Malaysia that's registered under our Cooperatives Commission. So we do provide what is we known as the WHOIS, and that's the registration data service request that under ICANN. So we do provide that WHOIS service as well for those who are requesting for the registrants of .my domain names. It's just we do not disclose the registrants' personal data anymore because we have to comply with the Personal Data Protection Act of Malaysia. So any law enforcement agencies that request for the information for a .my registrant, they would have to contact the registrant directly, or the law enforcement agencies will go through MINIC to request for the information on the administrative, technical, and billing contact. Okay, so just to share with you a snapshot of our last year's 2023 highlights, we have been using one of the many DNS abuse management tools out there. So for last year, we noted that farming claimed the top position. That's about 53% of the total of the 2,542 DNS abuse cases. Phishing came in at the second spot at 25%. Malware ranked third at 14%. Spam emerged as the fourth DNS abuse trend. So it counted about 8% and represented basically one of the lower reported categories. Surprisingly and encouragingly enough, there were no reported cases of botnet throughout of last year. Nevertheless, as we are now basically well into the second half of 2024, we basically would want to focus on addressing abused domain names that's associated with active malicious code. So we are focusing on those that are related to malware and botnet threats for this year, the remaining second half. Okay, so these are some of the initiatives that MINIC, part of our roadmap to try and in our focus to reduce and mitigate DNS abuse in the .my ecosystem. We have an acceptable use and abuse policy, which we adapted from the ICANN DNS abuse framework. So we are looking to engage further. We started the engagement with government agencies and law enforcement agencies and our registrars. We are looking to continue to monitor the DNS abuse trend through our abuse management tool, and we look forward for this year to continue our collaborative efforts between the law enforcement agencies and registrars, both domestic and international, to mitigate domain name abuse. just to share with you our acceptable use and abuse policy that we published in our corporate website, we have defined the abuse of a domain name, which generally refers to any illegal, disruptive, malicious, fraudulent, or deceptive acts which leads to the security and stability issues for registries, registrars, registrants, as well as the end users of the internet. So the definitions of some of the domain name abuse categories for malware, spam, phishing, farming, botnets are included in our policy. And we will continue basically to work very closely with our law enforcement agencies in Malaysia under the purview of the Communications and Multimedia Act and the regulations that Afiq explained earlier, to focus on, as a last resort, as a registry of last resort, to suspend and delete abusive domain names that have been validated by the registry. So these are some of the concerns that we are looking at in terms of the future and from a security emerging technologies perspective.
Ma'am, I'll ask you to quickly wrap it up. Thank you.
All right. So basically, for DNS security extension, we noticed that it is the adoption rate is low, and it could be due to many other factors, one of which could be a potential complexities in switching it on, and perhaps there may be a need to look at new protocols or to simplify it further. So thank you very much. I think I will wrap up my presentation at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Afiq and for Yiling Yo? Can we see any questions on? No? Perfect. Thank you. Up next, we have my colleague, Pitinan. She serves as a senior manager for IDN programs at ICANN, and today she'll be talking about guidelines for enhanced trust and usability in the DNS system. Thank you so much. Pitinan, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Pitinan, and I'm from IDN program at ICANN. So I'm going to share a little bit on the guidelines to build the trust and usability of the DNS. It's related to cybersecurity as well, and also maybe relevant to the previous speakers on how to use the IDNs more safely. So let me go to point 2. Okay, so I'll just go over a short 3 topics. So I'll show some homoglyphs, security issues, and then go beyond to the IDN implementation guidelines. Even though the name is IDNs, but it's actually relevant to all the other domain names as well, including the ASCII. And then the last point would be the current status of these guidelines. This is one of the examples. So you see the homoglyphs labels. So these 2 labels look the same, right? This is the cross-script homoglyph labels, which means on the example on the black at the top is actually from Latin. So if you type from like English keyboard layout, it will log the EPIC, which behind the scene is encoded into the 0065 Unicode, and so on. But if you're typing the same looking labels from perhaps the Russian keyboard layout, basically it will use the Cyrillic script, and that will translate to 0435, that series. So the whole thing, for the human eyes, they look the same, but basically for the behind the scene, they can be different. So imagine if you have this kind of 2 domain names exist in the system at the same time, it can be the perfect phishing. So you can think that you go to the color blue, but actually you end up in the color black, for example. Another example is within the script itself. So before it was between the 2 scripts, but this one is within the same script. Some of the script, they have the features that some of the mixing of the sequence of code points or characters can render to be the same. And this is from example from Thai script. The 2 labels are both from Thai. And if you looking at the first character on the top, it's actually from 0E41, which is some character that have 2 vertical lines. But you can also comprise that with the 1 vertical line 2 times, Like if you type VV, it can be look like W, for example. So this is the case that can generate the same looking labels, but behind the scene they are different. So this is another example of homoglyphs labels within the same script. And then another one is the mixed script this time within the single label itself. So if you have, for example, good tickets.example, you thought you're going to pay to buy your ticket. But actually, some malicious actor might want to do some tricks and use some of the O from the different script. So in this case, it's used from Greek. So the behind the scene, the code point, the first O is the Greek one, the second O is from Latin. So for this, again, it can end up bring the user to the different websites. And as you can see, even though it's related to IDNs, because it's more script, more code point than the usual ASCII, but actually it affects the ASCII domain names as well, because it's trying to imitate the general user that familiar with the ASCII. So with these examples, so then the IDNs, we have the IDN implementation guidelines, which is contractually bound by the registry agreement, by the registrar accreditation agreement as well, and also if you apply for the IDN CCTLDs, this also included in the IDN CCTLD fast track. So the IDN implementation guidelines is the guidelines, if you offer IDN at the second level, you have to follow these guidelines. The previous version was version 3, which was quite some years back. It was announced in 2011. So from then, we have a lot of community work on how to use the script more properly, balance between usability and securities. And right now we have the newer version, which is version 4.1. This is already been adopted by the board in 2022. And since then, we've been working with the contracted parties and also prepare our operation inside to implement this. So this is some of the guidelines that can help some of the issues shown earlier. So for example, guideline number 8, this is the new guidelines. We refer to the second level reference LGR. LGR stands for the label generation rules, which is basically if you offer a specific language or the script under your TLDs, you have to define how to generate this label properly. So for this one, even though you are the TLD who doesn't know the script or language, you can also refer to the script or language you plan to offer, and then you can use the security weighted solution. So for example, in Thai script, the label generation rules in the reference, it disallows these two characters to follow each other. So in a way, the label in the blue cannot happen if it follows the label generation rules. So only the first version will be able to register. Another guideline, this is actually not new. This is already there in version 3, which is no mixing between the script page. So basically the ASCII code point and the other script shouldn't be mixed in the same labels. So in this example of goodticket.examples, which one of the code points are not from the same as the others, shouldn't happen. And this can apply to many others risky name, right? Like PayPal here. So the first P is from 0070, and the second P is in red, which is from Civic, for example. So this one is one of the guidelines that can help preventing such cases. So that's about it. So right now the status of the guideline is since the board adopted in 2022, we've been preparing internally and also working with the contracted party to make sure that when it's launched, everybody is ready, there's no surprise. So we've been engaged with the contracted parties in the ICANN meetings, and we aim to announce the implementation this quarter. So after that, after 180 days, it will be the effective date. To the end user, you might not feel the difference much because many of the registry, they already working in these directions because the previous guideline was quite old. But in any case, we hope that even though we are not creating the totally secure internet in one day, but we are moving together to the better place over time. And this is, if you're interested, actually tomorrow at 11, we have the session on the multilingual internet. So you will see more discussion on the Balinese script, which is very relevant to Bali, and also the other script, how they develop the secure solution for IDNs. And with that, I think that's all my presentation. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions for Pitinen?
Yes. And please contact emails at the end, idnprogram@ican.org, for any question related to IDN.
I can't see anything online as well. Celine, no questions? Even on. Perfect. This was our last session for today. Thank you so much. You've been a very wonderful audience, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning, same place. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Recording stopped.